Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending where are you joining us today. It's a pleasure to be here today to manage this session, Managing Floods and Droughts, the Governance Challenge. My name is Eva Costa de Barros. I'm a water governance expert at Deltares, and I will be the moderator of this session. We have a session packed with interesting content and amazing speakers. First, we will hear open remarks from Eileen Burke, the global lead for water resource at the World Bank. Then, we are going to have 4 presentations. Ana Nunes introducing the EPIC response, co-authored by the World Bank and Deltares of the EPIC response framework. You have Dr. Homero Pantan, who will present the stress test tool and the applications, and Dr. Valentin Eid, who will share the practical approach of interesting and integrating flood and drought management. We really want to hear from you, so please leave any questions or comments you might have on the chat. Please include your name and organization. We have reserved some time after the presentation to respond to your questions, and we will also respond to your questions in the chat. Right now, I would like to invite Eileen Burke to give the open of this section.
Thanks, Eva, and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining our session, Innovative Tools and Approaches for Hydroclimatic Risk Management, which is hosted today and sponsored by Deltares and the World Bank. Climate change and climate disasters stemming from changes to the hydrological cycle are creating devastating effects. And if you've joined us today, you're probably very aware of this. It's hard to miss with, just over the past years, the devastating floods in Pakistan, the news of historic droughts in Europe, hurricanes and cyclones hammering coasts around the world, and recently wildfires with very large implications, both causes as well as effects that could have been mitigated by better water management. In fact, over the last 2 decades, at least 1.65 billion people have been affected by floods and 1.43 billion by droughts. And the economic and social costs have been staggering, with the poor and marginalized communities being disproportionately affected. And if you haven't yet, I really encourage you to visit a past World Bank report on High and Dry, which details one side of this story, the intergenerational effects of drought, looking at how a drought in a childhood of a child in an area that does not have adequate irrigation or other mitigation measures in place can have negative effects on well-being for the generations to come. So it's not just the person affected in that time of drought, but the health effects and the development effects can actually be tracked for generations. Hydroclimatic extremes, such as periods of abnormal dryness or wetness, are natural hazards and are increasing in a warming world. And managing these climate risks has been challenging to governments and practitioners worldwide. Part of the reason for this challenge is that these are complex challenges and they require intersectoral approaches. The risk reduction and the mitigation of these risks requires the work of sectors across the economy, across ministries, and this, from my professional perspective, I think this institutional element is the hardest part to get right in disaster risk reduction. So in this session, we're going to showcase successful implementation of tools and approaches, focusing on the application of the EPIC response framework and hydroclimatic stress test tool in different countries around the world. We have presenters from the World Bank, Deltares, and the Global Water Partnership. Our first presentation will be on the EPIC response framework. Drawing from the need for coordinated action, the EPIC response framework can help countries better understand and improve their preparedness by providing a mechanism for assessing the effectiveness and the interconnectedness of policies and programs that most directly affect the governance of hydroclimatic risks in their country or regions. The framework, first developed and published by the World Bank and Deltares in 2021, has since been transformed into an online software tool, soon to be launched, the Epic Response Assessment Methodology, or ERAM, that will help facilitate the process of applying the framework to crowd in stakeholders to look at what needs to be done for a whole of society approach to flood and drought management. The second presentation will showcase the application of a hydroclimatic stress test tool. And later on in the session, we'll have a presentation of a new publication integrating flood and drought management, practical approaches by the Global Water Partnership. We hope that you find this session today useful and that these new and complementary tools and approaches will better help you address your flood and drought risk management challenges, including addressing the institutional elements, being able to facilitate the discussion and the action between different actors to better mitigate flood and drought risks. So with that, Eva, back over to you.
Thank you, A. It was really a pleasure understand a little bit more about our challenge in this time. Right now, we are going to start with the first presentation. That is Ana Nunes Sanchez. She comes to the water resource management from an institutional law and policy perspective. She has more than 15 years of experience in the water management. And she has worked in the design and an implementation of the resilience water related projects in Latin America, Middle East, and Southeast Asia. She has a law degree in the University of Granada in Spain, master in environmental policy, and currently she's doing her PhD in the University of Amsterdam. Anna is co-author of the Epic Response report, and it will be a pleasure to understand more about this interesting methodology. Please, Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eva. Let me share my presentation really quickly. Thank you for this nice introduction, and thank you everybody for being here today. For the next few minutes, I would just like to introduce you to the main concepts behind the Epic Response framework, this framework of thinking to combine, to manage floods and droughts in a combined manner. And also talk to you a little bit about the implementation in a number of use cases that we've done in the last year. So as Eileen mentioned, the Epic Response program is a partnership between the World Bank and Deltares. We published the Epic Response Framework 2021. We've done the assessment methodology in 2022. We're putting together software to accompany the Epic Response Assessment methodology this year. And we have also applied the methodology in a dozen of countries across 3 regions. So we really have gone from concept to practical implementation in just a few years. So Eileen mentioned floods and droughts are some of the most devastating consequences of the climate crisis. And the interest of floods and in the combined management of floods and droughts has increased exponentially in the last few years. I think the World Bank has declared lately that they're no longer going to be supporting single sector projects for the management of floods and droughts. And you'll see Valentin coming up later with a report of the IDMP and IPFM just joining and looking at measures to manage floods and droughts combined. So what is the Epic Response? The Epic Response is really at a core is a silo breaker, and it really it's aimed to bring together the flood and drought communities to work together. I think it also denotes, as the name also helps us understand, I think what we believe will be, the effort that is required to manage floods and droughts combined. But, as Eileen mentioned, this is a really complex challenge. So we really need to rise up to the occasion with tools like this that take us, to do the extraordinary. The main audience of the EPIC response framework is the national governments, because they are the ones that need to really take leadership in the management of floods and droughts. But before we dive into the main the premises of the EPIC response framework, I would like to give you just a quick introduction of the three main principles that are behind this thinking, this EPIC response approach. The first principle that we use is the join up government principle. So we use this term to refer to the collaboration that is required by all the different government agencies to manage a complex challenge like floods and droughts. So you see here in my slide the different agencies that have a mandate in the management of floods and droughts. You have water resources management, disaster risk, hydromet, agriculture, natural resources management, but also finance and social protection. So each of these agencies have very big challenges, and they have a mandate that pertains to floods and droughts. But these agencies by themselves cannot do this. They cannot manage it by themselves. They really need to increase their synergies and the collaboration between them, because the whole is greater than its parts. So this EPIC response framework really look at all these agencies, describes what are their functions, and stress how really they need to collaborate. So we understand this is not easy, because we understand that agencies compete for resources and for influence and for power, but they all really need to go in the same direction if we are all to address this wicked challenge that is floods and droughts. The next principle behind the EPIC response framework is the principle of whole of society. So now we do place on government agencies of the burden of the leadership in the management of floods and droughts, but we understand very well that governments by themselves can also not do this. And they really need to bring a whole of society effort, because managing floods and droughts is a collective effort at its core. So we look into how it is that national governments can build partnership with local governments, which at times are different administrations, but also how national agencies can have programs that help them engage with the public and engage with the scientific community. But also, and Eileen also mentioned this, that there is sometimes segments of society that are more vulnerable to floods and droughts, and they're normally the hardest hits and the slowest to recover, and at times, unfortunately, do not beneficiate from government programs. So we really make an effort on social inclusions. At the core of this principle is the idea that agencies normally have a technocratic approach, but really to bring a whole of society effort, they need to bring other competencies into their staff. So, social specialists, public administration specialists, economists, communication specialists, all of these type of backgrounds are important to be hosted also in government agencies. The last principle, of course, is the principle of the entire hydroclimatic spectrum. So traditionally, floods and droughts have been treated like a separate phenomenon that is not connected. But the fact of the matter is that flood and droughts are closely interconnected and interdependent streams of the same hydroclimatic spectrum, and they often occur in close succession. So they have the potential to exacerbate each other's impacts. So we believe there are many synergies in the combined management of floods and droughts, from observation systems to planning exercises to a better understanding of land management to the use of infrastructure, both green and gray. So now, finally, this is the moment we've all been waiting for. Let me introduce you to the EPIC response framework. So again, it's not only a catchy phrase, it's really a mnemonic device that helps us remember all the elements that are behind the combined management of floods and droughts. So this cascade graph that I'm showing you here consists in these 5 levels: enabling, planning, invest, control, and respond. And I will walk you through each of them very briefly next, but the main idea here is that all of these different programs interact in synergistics and complex ways, but generally in a downward cascading manner, meaning that all that any improvement in an enabling program will have a positive impact in all the programs underneath. So at the end of the day, I mean, the idea behind this is that this is a system, and the way that all of these programs interact with each other ultimately determines what are the environmental, social, and economic impacts of floods and droughts. So if you have a very strong in one part but weak in the other, that at the end adds up to a less than desirable approach. So let me go one by one, starting from the bottom. Stay with me for a little bit. So we start with the response programs, and the idea here is that when a flood strikes or a drought takes hold, the immediate imperative, of course, is to provide support and help people that have been affected by the disaster. If we have an effective flood and drought response and recovery programs, these, of course, will reduce the impact of an extreme event. So you start seeing the cascade here. However, we know that just responding to an event is a reactive approach. We want to be proactive, and we want to mitigate and prevent disaster to the extent that's possible, of course, by managing hazards and reducing the exposure and vulnerability. So that's why we go up the ladder, and this, I think, provides a good level of detail on what preparedness and mitigation means. So the next level up are the control programs for controlling land and water use. So floodplain management is really important to reduce the exposure and vulnerability of people and assets to floods. In a similar fashion, a water allocation system really helps allocate water in a efficiently and equitably manner on regular basis, but also most importantly during drought. So by having programs to control land and water use, we reduce the exposure and the vulnerability, and that releases the pressure on the response programs, and that also has an impact on reduces the impact of floods and droughts. So you start seeing here how the cascade also continues working. So the next level up is the investment programs, investments in green and gray infrastructure, and in this case, healthy watersheds and a multi-purpose water reservoir might work in similar fashion in the sense that they reduce flood peaks, but they maintain and increase base floods during droughts. So investments in green and gray infrastructure reduces flood hazards, which release some of the pressure on the land and water use programs in the control section. And then that reduces the pressure in the response and ultimately also reduces the impact. And then the next level up is planning, and all these different agencies that we talked at the beginning, agriculture, disaster, water, all of these agencies have a mandate of performing plans. The idea here is that all of these plants share a hydraulic system, so therefore they impact on each other. So to give you an example, if you are an irrigation water supplier and you're doing your drought contingency plan, you really need to take into consideration the boundary conditions that have been established at the basin level. So what planning ultimately does is that helps bring in a landscape approach to your investments, both in green and gray infrastructure, which reduces the pressure on land and water use management programs, and that also reduces the need for response and ultimately also reduces the impact. And then finally, we have the enabling programs, and these are the programs that look at the policy and the laws and the agencies that are in place to perform all the programs for flood and drought risk management, but also look at information and the sharing of that information, and also all the programs that help agencies to bring a whole of society approach to what they do. So there you have it. That's the main logic behind the EPIC response framework, the main principles behind the mnemonic device. And here I'm just showing you the cascade graph with a little bit more of a level of detail. Each of the principles corresponds to 11 program areas. And the 11 program areas corresponds to more than 40 different programs that agencies normally carried out in the management of floods and droughts. That's a column on your far right. So in the report, but also in the assessment methodology, we look in detail to all of these programs, and these possibly represents one of the most comprehensive compendium of flood and drought risk management policies and programs that currently exist in the literature. So now that we've gone in depth on the elements of the EPIC response framework, I'm going to add another level of complexity, and is that of time, because we believe that all of those programs that we mentioned before evolve with time. They get better in time, responding to the conditions in a particular country. So that's what it's at the core of the EPIC response assessment methodology, to look at the level of evolution of all of these different programs in one country. So you have here in front of you an evolution table, and we have tailored evolution tables for all of the programs in the EPIC response framework. But generally, the story goes something like that. At the beginning, there is a nascent program. There is no legal framework, and any effort that gets carried out, it's done in an ad hoc manner. The next level is engaged. There is a legal framework, but the program is not yet operational. There is maybe no capacity, little budget. The next level, the program is operational. It starts to receive a little budget, it has a little capacity, but still learning to do its work. It's still figuring it out. And then an effective program, you have a legal framework that it's being refined with experience, and you have a robust program that has finance and resources, and they are really good at delivering services. So generally, nascent and engaged programs generally work more in silos, and capable and effective programs, they start reaching out and they start creating these synergies that we've spoken of. So it's this graph that I'm showing you right now is one of the deliverables of the assessment methodology. So it's a complex graph, but what we try to represent here in a snapshot, in an image, is the level of development of all of these 40 different programs. So you see here, enable, plan, invest, control, and response program. Each of the principles correspond to one color. You have orange for planning, for instance, and then the bars grow as the program becomes more effective. So if it's engaged, it's small, and if it's effective, is the largest one. So here in a graph like this, you might perhaps looked, perhaps figure out that maybe the response and the control programs in this particular figure are a little bit less advanced, perhaps, than the engagement programs. And that just helps a practitioner to understand where he or she might want to put some attention on. And just really quickly, also wanted to share that we have apply the EPIC response assessment methodology to a dozen of countries. You have them here on this map, and we're learning quite a bit as we do. But you just wanted to bring to your attention that within the applications that we've done, there is one that corresponds to a state government, the state of Assam in India. And now we're also applying to a city, the city of Beira, Mozambique. And to a certain extent, we looked at transboundary issues when we looked at the Netherlands. So it's interesting from a conceptual standpoint, because the EPIC response framework, it's being conceptualized for a national government, but we're stress testing it in all of these different forms of government, and we are actually noticing that the principles continue to apply, which is exciting. So, the EPIC response framework, again, is a complex tool that helps address a complex matter. Floods and droughts, it's a wicked problem. But if you have to walk out from this presentation today with an idea, let that be the 3 principles behind the EPIC response framework, which is that you need a joined-up government leading a whole-of-society effort to manage the entire hydroclimatic spectrum, both floods and droughts. So that's it. Let me also, direct you to the World Bank and the Deltares website for all the products that we put together. We have the, if you have 5 minutes of your time, we have brochures that explain the main concepts really quickly. If you have 45 minutes, we have an executive summary. If you have a lifetime of practice, there you have the main report. And we also have videos that also show the main concepts, our pilot applications and presentations. So you have resources if you need them. And that's all on my side. I look forward to your questions later.
Thank you very much, Anna. It was a really interesting presentation. I hope that everyone was able to follow the EPIC response framework. If you're curious, please join us and try to get the material in the website. You'll have more information about that. Now you're going to move to the second presentation. The next presenter, Romero, he did his PhD in the University of Oxford on global climate and water risk. He worked at the World Bank in the design of the strategies to manage risk to investments in the water and connected sectors and supports to the diagnosis of climate risk to country-level key sectors. He's also guest lecturer and research at the University of Oxford. Right now, I would like to welcome you, Romero, and please share with us your presentation.
Great, many thanks, Eva, for the introduction, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here to be joining remotely to this exciting session. So please let me know if you are able to see now my screen.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, wonderful. So again, thank you very much for joining to this exciting session and for being here today for attending this series of talks. So I'm going to be talking about our exciting stress testing tool. This is an effort that, along with Deltares, we've been developing this tool over the last, I would say, 12, 15, if not more months. Although the ideas to design it started before this. But in any case, as I mentioned, we start crystallizing this effort over a year ago. So before getting into the tool, what the tool actually is, first of all, I just wanted to quickly remind you what Eileen was already mentioning at the beginning when she was introducing the session. So we have several risks to water security, and I just put here some quick snapshots of headlines of global newspapers of some recent global shocks or global water risks events. Of course, I don't want now to start detailing each one of those, but as you can see, globally we have a range of events that go from floods, drought variability, that end up affecting our water systems, hydropower, water supply systems, or irrigation fields, and so on. So what I would like to emphasize is that indeed a changing climate, a changing and a variable water cycle end up affecting our water security goals or water security aims, and at the same time this ends up affecting development, ends up affecting our investments and overall welfare. But at the World Bank, we have experience also addressing this type of challenges, this type of water risks and water security challenges in a quantitative way. This climate and water interconnections. So especially over the last years, the World Bank, we have developed some tools, some online tools that you can access anytime you want, like the Climate Change Knowledge Portal, where you would be able to download data future climate data to understand especially what would be the future climate of a specific location, or at the same time the climate and disaster risk screening tool. But well, these efforts do exist, but at the same time we have been innovating in a number of tools, of number of tools and especially approaches on how to incorporate or how to understand water risks, water and climate risks at the local level and at local and country levels. So especially we have been following this approach on decision making under deep uncertainty. For those of you that are not familiarized with this approach, or also called the MDU, this approach consists on first understanding what are the characteristics of a system, what are the interconnections, what are its objectives, its aims, its performance goals, and from there try to identify what are the vulnerabilities of those systems, of those strategies, of those investments. And from there, we will be able to develop the strategies to increase the resilience, to increase the robustness, and to increase, if you want, the performance of those of those systems, of those investments. So a bottom-up type of approach, or again, a decision-making under deep uncertainty type of approach, starts first with identification of the system, and then to try to understand these vulnerabilities. And by vulnerabilities, what we mean is, in this case, I would like to show you here this exciting watermelon, being the watermelon, the investment, the water system, or plan or strategy, you name it. And each rubber band that we put around is a scenario of stress. An increase, X% increase in temperature, increase in precipitation, or decrease, if you want, also, of course, in precipitation during, let's say, the dry season, increase in demographics, and so on. So each rubber band that we put around our system is a stressor. So that's what we aim to understand. We want to understand, when would the watermelon collapse? What would be the circumstance? What would be the type of rubber band that would make our watermelon or our investment not to be reliable anymore? What would make what type of stressor or what type of rubber band would make our investment less robust, or basically not to perform in an adequate way? So at the end of the day, that's what we are aiming to do. That's what this approach is about. Again, understand the system, understand the vulnerabilities of those systems, and try to catch or to identify and at which point those vulnerabilities would make the system collapse. So we've been developing, or we've been applying this type of approach in a number of global projects, over 15 global projects across all the continents. We have developed frameworks for these, the decision tree, and the decision tree being one of them, the resilient water infrastructure design brief, and others. So while we've been successfully applying this approach or this way of thinking over the last years, with these approaches, with these frameworks that you can see here, we have also been facing some limitations of this approach. So the limitations, as you can see here, is basically that we've noticed that this approach is data intensive. So if you go back to if you remember the watermelon slide, each rubber band, it's one scenario, one climatological scenario, one hydrological scenario, and that could be really data intensive. So that could be a limiting factor for those that do not have access to high computing power. Also needs expert support. So that means that we need, for this type of approach, typically people with a strong background or understanding of climatology, hydrology, and so on, and people that know how to model these scenarios and are able to translate those scenarios, those rubber bands, into programming, computing language. And of course, that ends up being a very typically a lengthy process and has its budgetary or monetary also constraints. So again, these are some of the limitations that we were noticing with this approach, in spite of the successful applications that we have had with our study cases or with the applications of this approach globally. But in any case, the hydroclimatic stress testing tool, now to start presenting about our tool, the purpose of the stress testing tool is to facilitate and speed up this process, basically to address these limitations that I was mentioning before, to run this process or all these processes in a quick way, in a rapid way, that we don't need expert users or people with sophisticated understanding of climatology and hydrology to run this. With the stress testing tool, we don't aim that people require high computing power to run this, just an internet connection that you connect through a web browser and you explore and you do this type of exercise by yourselves. So again, the purpose of this stress testing tool is to connect these worlds, to facilitate, to facilitate and to allow users to apply these type of approaches to run this watermelon type of exercise, the stress testing of a system in a rapid way, in an efficient way, and also, of course, in a very scientific valid, in a robust, scientifically valid way. So let's get into the exciting world of the stress testing tool. So how is it going to be? Once that we know what the tool, what the tool will be capable of doing, as I was mentioning, the tool, we will be able to access this tool through a web browser, where once you open this link, you will be able, and you create a project, you will be able to choose the location on where you want to run this project. So you will be able to choose a global basin or sub-basin, or you just will be able to type down your local, your coordinates, your latitude or longitude points if you want. Here you would also be able, once you identify roughly where you want to run the tool, in how many points or where basically you would like to run the stress test. If you select a catchment, a global catchment, let's say the Nile, and you want to run the stress testing in a couple of points in the upper part of the river and also in the mouth of the river, you would like to choose those 2 points to try to understand, to try to identify in the tool what you want to stress test. Perhaps in the upper part of the catchment, you will have a reservoir where you want to stress test, and in the lower part of the catchment, you will have an irrigation field that you also like to stress test. So you choose those 2 points, right? Our tool also consists or is built upon historical reanalysis and satellite observations, where we connect or we run the historical climatological time series. So you will be able to choose, all right, for your study area, where do you want your precipitation and temperature from? Do you want it from CHIRPS or do you want from ERA5 sources? So CHIRPS, just to remind you, is a satellite source, and ERA5 is a global reanalysis tool of global climate. A reanalysis data set of global climatological variables. So you will be able to choose if you think that ERA makes more sense or CHIRPS will make more sense. You choose either source of climatology. Well, then you will have the option to also upload, let's say, observations in the case you want to validate your model, right? If you think, let's go for CHIRPS, for example, for precipitation, but then I also want to upload or to see how the model is performing, how the hydrology, how river flow is performing in my river flow, you would be able to upload those time series. Again, then you will have a basic, let's say, validation of your model to try to understand not just the performance of the model, but also the potential biases that you might have. At the end of the day, our tool is built upon global models, global hydrological models, and as you were seeing before, built upon global climatological variables. So that means that while this is a very important and significant progress or a major step forward in global hydroclimatological modeling, there could also be potential biases. So it's also always good to understand where those biases are. I mean, perhaps our model does a very good job in detecting detecting flow peaks, but perhaps it could need a better, a bit more of an improvement, let's say, to capture the onset of the rainy season. So this type of thing, just to keep in mind when you interpret your results. In any case, once you have your model validated and your model is ready and all set up, then we get into the, let's say, more exciting part, that is the stress testing part, or the understanding of the future. In this panel or in these next steps, you would be able to choose what the hydrological variables you want to stress test, or what type of output hydrological variables you want. So you can choose from a number of hydrological variables. I will go through that in later slides. And but in any case, what I want to show you is that you will have a range of hydrological and climatological outputs to choose from. And you will also be able to see how these hydrological variables will be reflected when using CMIP6 type of climatological time series, or sorry, climatological projections. So as you can see here, for example, in this example, that's where you have for this example location, future changes on the left panels, projected future changes in temperature, projected future changes in precipitation with their uncertainties, but also panels where you can see, like on the right, what's the distribution of those changes. So some climate models might tell you that precipitation changes by -5% or -50%, as you can see here. So you would be able to explore those potential changes. What are those ranges that the climate models are projecting? So this is again to inform the stress testing exercise. And finally, this is one of the exciting outputs that we have, that this is the result of the stress testing. So once this specific location, or the specific locations that you chose, you stress test them against a wide range of climate futures that you selected in previous panels. In the previous panel, you also be able to choose what conditions of stress test do you want, under which ranges of stress do you want to put your system. So here you will see the results. In this case, you can see that this panel on the right is telling us what conditions of stress this example system will be facing. But also you will be able to move around the vulnerability threshold of your system. So that means that in this case, for this example system, you perhaps think that if 25% of vulnerability is crossed, your system will be at risk. Your water investment, your strategy will be at risk. But if you think that perhaps a 55% makes more sense, you will be able to play around with this threshold. And then, well, let's get a bit more into the type of outputs that we will have, as I was mentioning before. So these are the number of metrics that we will have. As you can see, we have climatological variables, hydrological outputs, or terrestrial hydrological variables, and we have also hydrological indicators and metrics. So we have the typical, I would say, metrics and indicators, but at the same time we have novel hydrological outputs that consist of river flow, overland flow, evapotranspiration, groundwater recharge, snow water equivalent, of course, for those relevant areas. Metrics, as you can see, flood frequencies, evaporation to precipitation ratio, and so on. You can have a look at them. And importantly, the spatial resolution of our tool is going to be 10 kilometers by 10 kilometers. So again, at the grid level or at catchment, as we were reviewing previously. So these are the type of questions that basically we will be able to answer with the stress testing tool. Again, these are just some example questions that we put here that range from what are the basic hydrological, the historical and future hydrological conditions that, let's say, my hydropower station, my hydropower plant will be facing in the future or have been facing in the past. Is my hydropower plant at risk of delivery or of not delivering? What's the historical low flow of my river? Is there a risk that this historical low flow will not be crossed? Will be crossed, sorry. What are also the vulnerability levels of my catchment? Do I have high vulnerability levels? If I have a range of investments, how could I rank those the vulnerability levels or the risk levels of those investments? If I know that in my country there was a drought, let's say in 2015, that was very severe, very significant, what were the hydrological conditions of that drought? Am I at risk that this 2015 drought will be this 2015 drought will be met again? Is there a risk that we will be able to cross that, let's say, threshold of the 2015 drought, or 2021 flood in some countries? And what's the risk that this will occur? And so on. There's a number of questions that we will be able to answer. And here, just to finalize, I'm going to quickly show you an example of an application, of a real application that we use when we use this tool in Cambodia to inform or to understand or to examine climate vulnerabilities and climate risk levels of some selected dams and reservoirs over there. So first of all, the tool before going, as I was mentioning before, the tool before getting into the complexity, let's say, of future climate also offers the possibility to explore the current situation or the historical situation, if you want. So here we're able to see some basic, let's say, temperature and precipitation maps where users will be able to see the spatial distribution or spatial variability of these variables.
Homero,
again, when this is
just to ask you to try to wrap up your presentation. Yeah,
I'm finishing.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we will be able to see what are the changes as I was mentioning, the validation on what were the historical river flow conditions or sewer flows conditions, changes in precipitation, evapotranspiration, and temperature. And then we will be able to, in this example, we were able to see projected changes in river in climate projections under different climate scenarios and different climate time horizons. And finally, with the stress testing result, with the stress testing exercise, we were able to see under what conditions, again, these selected reservoirs and dams were at risk. So amongst other results, we were able to identify that just under less than 20% of climate scenarios, the mean flow conditions of those reservoirs were met. So that means that these reservoirs and these dams are at high risk, of, again, not delivering. So again, this was an example or an application in Cambodia. And just to finalize here, well, you can quickly go through these final reflections that I'm not going to discuss now for time, but just to conclude, we're also applying this tool in a number of global operations and projects to inform, again, risk levels and vulnerability and climate vulnerabilities of projects. So thank you very much. I hope you get in touch with us. We're very excited to be showing you this tool, and please feel free to drop any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure understand more about Impressive tool that is helping to speed up the process, right? Right now, I'm keeping an eye on time. I would like people to write the questions in the chat, then you're going to answer. Right now, I would like to welcome Dr. Valentin Ait. He joined the Global Water Partnership as a senior water and climate specialist in 2020. And he's also part of World Meteorological Organization, working with different programs, flood droughts. And I'm really curious to understand more about his work. Please, Valentin, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Eva, and thanks a lot for the invitation to the really interesting event. So I'm presenting this on behalf of WMO, the World Meteorological Organization, and the Global Water Partnership. And we have these two joint programs, one on flood management with the complicated acronyms and one on drought management. And the technical support unit for these projects are based at WMO in Geneva, where I'm based as well. And I'll go very quickly through the first few slides in sake of the time. So this is just the story of and then the approach of APFM. It's over 20 years now. And it was really the first program that came from flood control to flood management, including risk management, land use management, and water resources management to balance the development needs on the one side, but then also, of course, the flood risk itself. IDMP is younger. We celebrate 10 years this year, and it's the sister program on drought to the APFM, to the flood program. And we are promoting the 3-pillar approach that is widely accepted and implemented around the world. So the pillar 1 is monitoring, early warning. Pillar 2 is the risk and impact assessment. And the 3rd pillar is the risk mitigation, preparedness, and response. So the real action then to mitigate the risk on droughts. And we are not alone as with these programs. We have a lot of partners with IDMP. We have over 45 partners, including the World Bank and Deltares and APFM as well. So we are an open program, and we are always open for new collaborations and new organizations that bring in different aspects of flood and drought management. We also have this help desk for drought management, and we have it for flood management. And I invite you to visit our websites, where people can ask questions, and this can range from students asking what's the best drought indice to use for my country or my region, to really countries asking us to support them in coming up with drought or flood risk strategies and so on. So please have a look on the website to learn more. But now I'm coming directly then to the question. So we're working closely together with this program. And I just want to start with what Anna was already mentioning, that the flood and drought are actually on the same scale. So however, they are opposite. So I think the yin-yang example describes it quite well. It's the concept that these are actually opposite forces, but they are interconnected. And this is also how we see them. And I want to point you to a new publication of FAO and our 2 programs. It will be currently under final editing by FAO, and it will be released soon. And it's really based on the EPIC response approach that Anja presented. And it adds to that with practical examples and case studies. So when we look into flood and drought, we heard it several times today, there are, of course, a lot of things that are completely different. The time scales, the awareness. On the one side, we have too much water. On the other side, we have too little water. However, a lot of synergies, and we've heard that very well from Anna already. And we want to look in these 3 areas here. The first one, monitoring, forecasting, and early warning of floods and droughts. Then the second aspect, assessing the risks and the impacts of droughts. And the 3rd pillar is for us the actions to prevent, prepare, awareness, and the policy development for floods and droughts. And there are a lot of synergies. And I just want to have a short glimpse into the practical approaches where we really can see the differences, but where we can also see the synergies within these important pillars. So when we look into the first pillar, the monitoring and early warning, there are, of course, deep differences. I think one that holds not just for this pillar, but that holds in general for why flood and drought is managed still often in silos, is because there are 2 scientific disciplines and 2 practical disciplines also when you look into the governance. So for flood, it's more the hydrology part, the water part. For drought, it's often the agricultural, meteorological, or climatological community that is dealing with that. And they still continue on a national level to work in silos. We see that even within WMO, for example, that these are different scientific communities that we try to bring together. And then, of course, also something that does not just hold for the monitoring and early warning is something that's very obvious, the time scale. So the fast onset events, flood, and compared to the slow onset event, drought, of course, is there is a different lead time. There is different time to react. The one gets a lot of attention. The drought don't get attention because it's creeping and building up slowly. It's the silent killer, as we say. So there are a lot of differences that we need to take into account as well. But when we look into the synergies, now looking into the monitoring, you can see there are most of the variables that actually need to be monitored by national meteorological services are jointly managed with for flood and drought. So you see the list there. I won't go through it, but almost all of these variables need to be monitored to understand flood and drought and to make informed decisions for both. And so when we manage these hazards jointly, we see that there are approaches. So from the hydrological and the flood side, we see the drought side can of course profit as well, because all these water resources information that are often lacking because we are focusing with drought often just on agriculture are also very important. And on the other side, the flood community can profit from this longer term forecast idea of and the operational monitoring of agricultural products, for example. And I think when we look into the future, that we see all these developments of seamless prediction capabilities between real-time data. We had the question in the chat to long-term seasonal forecasting. And I think that's an answer that really helps both. And of course, the stakeholders, and I'll come to that with this next slide. They are really the same. Of course, when we look into the monitoring and early warning, they are the same stakeholders, but as also when we look into the people affected by floods and droughts, and we see countries, Slovenia, for example, was just hit by their worst flood ever. The year before they had the worst drought ever. We saw in Italy the long-term spring drought was just interrupted by a flood and then continued as a drought. So we see the countries are suffering with that, and they really need to deal. Therefore, this framework that World Bank and TARIS developed, I think, is really to the point. Then I'm coming very shortly just to the second pillar, to this risk assessment and impact assessment. There are, of course, this concept that everybody knows from IPCC that risk equals hazard times exposure times vulnerability holds for both. And so we see when we look, for example, in the vulnerability, there is a lot of overlap between the people that are affected by floods and droughts. It's very obvious. Exposure, there are, of course, differences. For floods, it can be more linear along rivers and so on, but still we see that marginalized groups and so on are exposed more than others. And for the hazard itself, of course, it's different. And we talked about that with the flood and the drought monitoring. And then I'll come already to the third pillar, to where it really comes to action, to reduce the risk, to mitigate the risk, and to build preparedness and increase the resilience. This disaster cycle holds, of course, for floods and droughts in the same way. Also, this hydrological cycle. I think most of you have heard of it. That once a flood happens, there is a policy interest and there is media interest, and everybody says we will change everything. And after 2 months, it's forgotten because there has been another important issue. And this holds for drought as well, and that hinders the resilience building. And this is something that we need to overcome for floods and droughts. And when we look into the actual measures, I think that's the most interesting part here. What really helps floods and droughts? What can we install as a country, green or gray infrastructure, to mitigate floods and droughts? It's mainly everything related to water storage, and that's on different scales. So a healthy soil, for example, and a healthy watershed were mentioned by Anna, can store water. On the one side for a drought period, so the ecosystems and the plants can have more water, but of course it also infiltrates the water and hinders therefore floods. And on the big scale, the reservoir actually does the same, but on a different scale. It stores water for the time when we really need it, and it can lower the flood peaks of rivers, for example. And there are many very good examples that are currently developed. I would like to invite you to Google FloodMar, for example, very good examples from California or Morocco, where we see how that really works in the landscapes, that we infiltrate the water during flood to the groundwater storages, for example, and then we can profit of that during the drought periods or water scarce periods. And this is my last slide to finalize. So these are the takeaway messages, and I'll invite you to read through them. I'll try to stay in time, and with that, I'll give to you the word back, Eva. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for the interesting presentation. We are running out of time. I would like to welcome Aileen to give the closing remarks. We have been responding to questions in the chat. Then I would like to invite Aileen for the closing remarks. Thank you, everyone that's here today.
Thanks so much, Eva. And I'm going to talk very quickly because I think we're going to be cut off at any second. I'd really like to thank everyone for joining us here today, everyone who's presented, and especially our donors who have funded a lot of this work, those who have donated to the Global Water Security and Sanitation Partnership at the World Bank, as well as the Global Facility for Disaster Risk Reduction. Many of you have been asking for links that we've been to these resources, which we've been putting in the chat. In addition, I'd invite you to visit the World Bank Water website, which has many of these resources and more. We just heard some great examples about how storage should be part of flood and drought mitigation, and planning and jointly planned for both flood and drought benefits. We recently had a large report come out on what the future has in store, a new paradigm for storage, water storage, and we'll be having a session on that on Wednesday, an online session. So we invite all of you to be joining for that as well, but you can find information about that. We also had a recent report come out about groundwater management and the role that better groundwater management can play in mitigating shocks, and how groundwater could be better used for drought mitigation, especially in parts of Africa. And that there's a huge opportunity cost of not better using groundwater, of course, in a sustainable way, in order to mitigate drought shocks. So I hope that you all have had a good taste of the types of tools that are being developed to facilitate integrated joint planning and evaluation of strategies for flood and drought risk mitigation. As you saw in Anna's presentation, we're helping countries, as well as with Deltares in a number of places, to pilot the framework to identify where more work is needed to create more robust systems for flood and drought management. And Homero and Valentin have both given you great examples of then how some of the possible solutions can be stress tested, or how different various options can be considered to also strengthen within the EPIC response framework to strengthen flood and drought risk management. We are very much involved in the World Bank in this whole of society approach, and I know Deltares is as well. As part of that, the World Bank board just last week has said that water is one of the global priority programs for the bank in the coming 5 years. Given the magnitude of challenges facing countries around water, the projected increase in challenges because of climate change, because of increased needs for water for development and population growth, and recognizing the complexity of the situation, the need for country level, local level, as well as transboundary level intervention to really help countries meet flood and drought risk management. So we'll be working with countries to increase resources available and to expedite systems to really have increased impact in the water sector going forward, including flood and drought risk management. And of course, we expect the EPIC response framework and these other tools to play a big role in that. But to be able to reach the level of aspiration we have in helping countries, we're going to need involvement of everyone. This is sort of an all hands on deck moment. We need public sector and private sector and all involved if we're going to meet the Sustainable Development Goals for water. And so we look forward to working with all of you to continuing this conversation, but to looking forward to ways in which we can increase our partnership with various organizations moving forward to help bring a water secure world for all. So many thanks to Deltares for co-hosting this with us, and to all of you for joining. And we'll see you at the rest of the Water Week facilities.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.